Hello YouTube, Dave here again. One of my favorite video series that I've worked on over the last few years has been my Through the Ages videos. It's a series where I've been mainly looking at the evolution of D&D classes from one edition to the next. But as fascinating as that is, at least for me, as somebody who collects all the different editions and enjoys all the different editions, I like to go through and just kind of see how other elements of the game have evolved over time. So while I do want to get back into the class-based Through the Ages series, and I will be starting my look at the Paladin very, very soon, today I wanted to take a look at arguably one of the most iconic Dungeons & Dragons spells of all time and see how it's changed, because surprisingly enough, there's been a fair amount of evolution to this one iconic spell. So today we are going to be looking at Magic Missile Through the Ages. As iconic as Magic Missile is to Dungeons & Dragons or to fantasy role-playing in general, it was actually kind of surprising when I went to try to find it in the Zero Edition rulebooks to find that it wasn't in the original white box collection. The Magic Missile spell actually made its official book debut in Supplement 1 Greyhawk for Zero Edition or OD&D, original Dungeons & Dragons, whatever you want to call it. Now, this version of the spell would also be used for the basic expert rule set, so the Holmes basic, as well as the Moldvay Cook basic expert rules, and then finally the Menser-Beckme system. Those all used the same version of Magic Missile. So we're going to start with these ones. I'm going to lump them together. If the spells are very similar from one edition to the next, then they're just going to be combined here. So for OD&D / BX, Beckme, Basic, whatever you want to refer to it as, Magic Missile began life doing 1d6 plus 1 with a range of 15 inches in OD&D or 150 feet in the Rules Cyclopedia. So it seems like in that case, each inch was equal to 10 feet. The spell also created 2 additional missiles for every 5 levels, with no other caveats in place. So at 6th level, Magic Missile is generating 3 missiles, and at 11th level, then you're generating 5 missiles. At 16th level, you would get an additional 2 missiles, so you can get up to 7 magic missiles with your spellcaster. In fact, it can even go beyond that, I think, because you can get up to like level 36 if you're a magic user in Beckme. So Magic Missile can definitely get out of hand if you're playing a campaign long enough to do it. But 1d6 plus 1 plus 2 additional missiles for every 5 levels. So that's how Magic Missile began. So we're just going to move this off to the side here. And then up next, we're going to take a look at Magic Missile as it appeared in 1st edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. So in AD&D 1st edition, the spell has a range of 6 inches plus 1 inch per level. Again, a lot of old school D&D was based off of tabletop wargaming, so they did use inches as a unit of measurement for ranges, movements, all that sort of stuff back in the day. The spell does 1d4 plus 1, so we'll go from a d6 down to a d4. And this creates 1 additional missile for every 2 levels, as opposed to 2 additional missiles for every 5 levels beyond 1st. So with this one, you get 1 missile at 1st, you gain 2 missiles at 3rd, 3 missiles by the time you reach 5th. What's interesting, though, is that there is nothing in the description stating that there is a maximum number of missiles that can be created. So at 9th level is where you would normally get 5 missiles. So at 11th level, you would have 6. 13th level, you would have 7, and it would continue on and on like that as you progress through levels. So 1d4 plus 1, 1 missile for every 2 levels, but no limitation on the amount of missiles that you can create based off of your level. So that's 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Up next, we have 2nd edition AD&D. And in 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Magic Missile works as follows. Number 1, the range is now 60 yards plus 10 yards per level. So it seems like perhaps the inches, instead of being 10 feet per inch in AD&D First Edition, if you're to assume that they translate from one directly to the other, then in AD&D, then each inch would be the equivalent of 10 yards, apparently. Which again, if you're looking at longer ranges and stuff like that, it does. There's different types of size charting depending on what you're doing in AD&D. So it's lots of fun trying to figure that out sometimes. So 60 yards plus 10 yards per caster level does 1d4 plus 1 with 1 additional missile for every 2 levels. However, this is the version of the game where it does state quite clearly that it shoots a maximum of 5 missiles. So when you reach 9th level, that's where the magic missile spell reaches its pinnacle, its peak, and doesn't progress beyond that. So we went from 1d6 plus 1, 2 missiles for every 5 levels with no cap, to 1d4 plus 1 for 1 missile for every 2 levels with no cap, to 1d4 plus 1 with 1 missile for every 2 levels with up to a maximum of 5. So that was 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. Now entering the 3rd edition era, we have 3 versions of Magic Missile, which are all identical. So we've got Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition, we have Dungeons & Dragons 3.5, and we have Pathfinder 1st edition. So all 3 of these are going to be grouped together because all 3 of these have the same description for the spell, which reads that it has a range of 100 feet plus 10 feet per level. So again, the ranges have sort of modified and changed with each version of the game so far. And that's the biggest change, really, is just the range. So instead of being 60 yards plus 10 yards per level, it is 100 feet plus 10 feet per level. And it still does 1d4 plus 1 per missile, and it generates 1 missile for every 2 levels beyond level 1 to a maximum of 5 missiles at 9th level. You can also target multiple enemies with this, and it does specify that you have to be within a certain number of feet. The targets can't be too spread out for Magic Missile to be able to target both. I think it's 15 feet or something like that. It'll be in the, you can see the description on screen as I'm talking. But yeah, so that is the 3rd edition era of the Magic Missile spell. So we are going to move on now to one of the, probably the most controversial version of the Magic Missile spell, and that came with the release of Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition. Now, I love 4th edition. I think it's a great system. It's a ton of fun to run. I think it's fun for the players to play. They always have things that they can do. But they did change the way that the spell system works. For example, we no longer have spell slots with a certain number, like a maximum number of spells usable per day. Instead, in 4th edition, characters have abilities they can use an unlimited number of times per day. They have abilities that they have to complete a short rest in order to regain the use of. And they have daily abilities, which are their most powerful attacks, that they have to get a full, I think it's 6 hours of rest in D&D 4th edition. Now, this version of Magic Missile was an at-will ability, so this is something that a wizard could do an unlimited number of times per day. And the way that it works here is it is 2d4 plus intelligence modifier, which increases to 4d4 plus your intelligence modifier when you reach level 21. The spell has, or the ability has, a range of 100 feet. But the biggest change to this is that it now requires an attack roll in order to hit. So Magic Missile had, up to this point, always automatically struck the target, an unerringly strike, unless you play like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, in which case it can just do whatever it wants. But this is the first version where you actually had to make an attack roll to hit with the Magic Missile spell. So that was something that was not received particularly well, even by people who really enjoyed 4th edition D&D. It did feel like it had changed Magic Missile maybe just a little bit too much. Now, the attack roll was using the wizard's intelligence against the target's reflex defense, so it was kind of the equivalent of like a touch attack type of idea, using their best ability score for the attack roll, but it still felt a little bit too different. So it was errated, and that errata did become official in the D&D Essentials Heroes of the Fallen Lands book, where Magic Missile is still an at-will ability. However, instead of requiring an attack roll, it once again just automatically strikes to deal damage. Its range is still 100 feet, but the damage has been changed from 2d4 plus intelligence modifier to simply 2 plus intelligence modifier, but it is guaranteed automatic damage. It hits, and then it's not going to miss, right? You don't have to worry about that. So it's 2 plus the intelligence modifier. At 11th level, it increases to 3 plus your intelligence modifier. And at level 21, it increases to 4 plus your intelligence modifier. But it is, once again, a guaranteed hit, guaranteed damage, no attack roll required. So that was the 4th edition era. This is probably the biggest single change in the Magic Missile spell that we've seen. For D&D 5th edition, however, we sort of returned to the classic version of Magic Missile. So it does automatically hit. A missile fired with the Magic Missile spell does 1d4 plus 1 points of damage. The range for the 5th edition Magic Missile spell has been increased to 120 feet, but the biggest thing is that a first level version of this spell generates 3 bolts automatically. So it's 3 bolts, each doing 1d4 plus 1. Now, you can use a higher level spell slot in order to cast the Magic Missile spell, and for each level above 1 that you use for the Magic Missile spell, it grants in 1 extra missile. So a 2nd level spell slot would generate the 3 normal missiles as well as 1 additional. If you used a 3rd level spell slot, then it would create 4 or 5 magic missiles for 5d4 plus 5 if it's single target, or 5 targets taking 1d4 plus 1, or any combination that you can think of using that. Now, I got to be honest, this is kind of an interesting version of the spell. Like, the first level version is insanely powerful when you compare it to the first level version of just about any other version of Magic Missile, with the possible exception of the original 4th edition version, which was 2d4 plus your intelligence modifier. So it was up to 2d4, likely plus 3 or plus 4 at first level, but that required an attack roll, so there was a chance that that could miss. In 5th edition, you could just fire 3 bolts for 3d4 plus 3 that automatically strike their target. The one criticism that I would have of the 5th edition version of Magic Missile is that it is very much diminishing returns, in that, like, you could use a higher level spell slot to cast a Magic Missile spell, but it's never really going to be as good as a damage-dealing spell of the same level. And you just get more missiles if you use multiple first-level spell castings of it, rather than a second level. Like, for example, if I were to use 2 first-level spells to cast Magic Missile twice, that's going to be 6 missiles. If I use 1 second-level spell slot, I mean, sure, I don't use up my first-level spell slots, but that's only 4 missiles instead of 6. So there's kind of a weird kind of drop-off. And if you think about using a 3rd level spell slot, I mean, yeah, it's guaranteed damage, but a Fireball as a 3rd level spell has a base damage of 8d6. And yeah, it requires a saving throw, a dexterity saving throw for half, and, you know, something like evasion can negate that. But unless you're attacking a Thieves Guild, or your DM is just really, really mean to you, you shouldn't be firing a Fireball at a group that is consisting solely of individuals with evasion. So 8d6 in a 20-foot radius affecting multiple targets is just always going to be better than 5d4 plus 5 to a single target, or 1d4 plus 1 for up to 5 targets. I don't know. It's an interesting change, but for me, the first level version of the spell is the one that I'd be the most likely to use. And use the higher level spell slots for higher level spells, which will likely be doing better damage anyway. But that's the 5th edition version, and then we're going to finish things off with the Pathfinder 2nd edition Magic Missile. So in Pathfinder 2nd edition, you do have a bit of a difference in the way that the rules are handled. In combat, each character has 3 actions that they can utilize, and with their spells, each component that the spell has, so verbal, somatic, or material, counts as one of the actions that you're using in combat. Most spells will have 2 actions that it requires you to use to cast a spell, because they'll have like verbal and somatic. Somatic is like hand gestures and things like that, body movements, and verbal is sort of reciting incantations. And then if it has a material cost, then that's an additional action that would use, and or not material cost, but material component. And then you would like use the object. Like for example, fireball, you have like a pinch of back guano that you do like the hand gestures, you do the incantations, and then you throw essentially the guano, which turns into the fireball. At least that's how the older versions of it work. Magic Missile, however, is one of the spells in Pathfinder 2nd Edition that is different depending on how many actions of yours you wish to commit to casting it. So if you use a single action to cast Magic Missile in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, for a range of up to 120 feet, you fire 1 missile that does 1d4 plus 1. However, if you use 2 actions to cast the spell, then it's 2 bolts at 1d4 plus 1 each. And if you decide to just stand your ground and use all 3 of your actions that round to cast Magic Missile, then it's 3 missiles at 1d4 plus 1 each. Now, similar to 5th edition D&D, spells don't automatically improve the way that they did in older editions of D&D or even Pathfinder 1st edition. Instead, you have to do what's called heightening a spell. So if you're a wizard, you heighten a spell by preparing it using a higher level spell slot. In this case, for Magic Missile, you have to heighten it. It says heighten plus 2. So you have to start, like, it has to be a spell level that's 2 higher for each, like, increase that you want to use. So if you had Magic Missile as a 1st level spell and you want to use it with your 3rd level spell slot, then you would have to memorize Magic Missile in that 3rd level spell slot. If you're a sorcerer, you're a lot more limited in your magical repertoire, so you would have to use one of the spells that you gain when you level up to learn a heightened version of a spell that you already have. There is like a signature spell ability that sorcerers also get where they can just do it automatically. They don't have to keep learning higher level versions of the same spell, but that's kind of their trade-off. Anyway, if you do heighten the spell to a spell slot 2 levels higher, so 1st to 3rd, for example, for each action that you spend to cast the spell, you create an additional Magic Missile. So at a 3rd level spell slot, if you're using just a single action, it is 2 missiles at 1d4 plus 1 each. If you use 2 actions, you fire 4 bolts. And if you use all 3 of your actions for that round, you're firing 6 Magic Missiles. If you use a 5th level spell slot to cast Magic Missile, then it would be 3 missiles for each action that you have spent to cast the spell. So for 1 action, it would be 3 missiles. For 2 actions, it would be 6 missiles. And for 3 actions, it would be 9 missiles. And it just sort of continues on that trajectory. So you can get a lot of missiles that you can fire off. But again, you have the option to see how many of your actions you really want to spend, because there might be something else that you need to do or that you want to do, but you still want to get a little bit of damage in there. So, for example, being able to move, move away out of combat, maybe even drink a potion, or draw and drink a potion, and then still fire off a spell. Like, you can do that in Pathfinder, so you do get the option there, which is probably one of my favorite. It's probably my favorite version of the Magic Missile spell, because it's a bit more flexible, right? Because, you can decide what you want to do with that spell. You can do all 3 of your actions and get that 3d4 plus 3, off if you want, or more with higher level spell slots. So yeah, I really like the way that they handled Magic Missile in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's probably my favorite version of it. I'm not going to go through and rank them all, but I would say that, I do like the Pathfinder 2nd Edition Magic Missile. I actually do like the 4th Edition Magic Missile, the one that is the attack roll required. But if I were to run 4th Edition, and I do plan on running it at some point in the near future, then I would have both versions available. One would be the one that automatically hits. The other that requires the attack roll, I would call like Force Missile, or I would change the name to something. or, you know, energy bolt or something like that, force bolt, and then have it do the attack roll. Because I do still think that it's a good ability, but it did stray a little bit too far. And of course, it's interesting to see the 1d6 plus 1 that we had back in the day with the original version of the spell, the 1d4 plus 1 with one spell every 2 levels, but no cap in the first edition era, and of course the quality that we have, or the spell that we had with the 3rd edition era. It's just, again, one of D&D's most iconic spells, and I love it. So that was my look at the evolution of the Magic Missile spell through the ages. Now let me know in the comments below if there's any other spells that you'd like me to take this kind of look at. Like recently I learned how devastating the web spell could be in 3rd edition Dungeons & Dragons. So if you want to see how that's kind of evolved over the years, let me know. I can do that. Or if you have other suggestions, please let me know. We don't have to limit this necessarily to just classes or spells. It could be other things. It could be some like specific rules, like the rules for death and dying, or critical hits, or things along those lines. So if there's anything that you want me to take a look at and see how it's evolved, please leave that in the comments section below. Anyway, thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you all next time. Until then, take care.